My family didn't convict me in a courtroom, they did it at our own dinner table. When I realized what was happening, it was close to nightfall, and nothing in that quiet Iowa neighborhood looked unusual. But the moment I walked through that door, the biggest betrayal of my life had already been prepared. That night, they told me that everything that belonged to me had been placed in someone else's hands, and that it was all being done for my own good. That's when I understood that in America, you don't need to yell, hit, or threaten someone to destroy them. Sometimes all it takes is paperwork and family signatures. My name is Sarah Miller. I was 33 years old at the time. I was divorced, living in Des Moines, working mornings at an accounting office and evenings at a restaurant as a second job. I had debt, yes. I was tired, yes. But I was standing on my own feet. I wasn't dependent on anyone. At least, that's what I believed. The reason I went to my family's house that night was simple. My mother had said, "We need to talk." Ever since childhood, that sentence had always meant something was wrong, but I never imagined anything like this. When I walked inside, the atmosphere was cold. My mother Karen didn't smile like she usually did. My father Thomas was sitting at the head of the table, his hands clasped together. My younger brother Ethan was looking at his phone. And my sister Rachel was sitting in my seat. That detail might seem small, but in my family, everyone has their place. Her sitting there was the first message they sent without saying a word. "You don't have a voice here anymore." A folder was placed on the table. My name was written on it. A black folder, official, the kind that smells like lawyers. When I opened it, there were property documents, bank statements, and a power of attorney form inside. My heart started pounding. Because in America, these documents are no joke. They mean you've handed control of your life to someone else. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was shaking, but I wasn't yelling. In my family, the emotional one always loses. Rachel spoke. "It's about the house." "I don't have a house," I said. "You know that." "Mom and Dad's house," she said. "But you had a share. You don't anymore." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean I don't?" My father spoke without looking at me. "We made a family decision." "Aren't I family?" I asked. My mother stepped in. "Sarah, we didn't do this against you. We did it to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked. "From your debts," she said. "If a lien showed up tomorrow, the house could have been at risk." That's when I understood the truth. The system works very clearly. If you have debt, you are the risk. And risk can be removed, even from family. My sister had transferred all the assets into her own name. The inheritance money in the bank was now under her control. My share was put on hold with a polite "we'll figure it out later." Which, to put it simply, meant this: they took my money, locked my future, and labeled me as unreliable. "How could you do this without even asking me?" I said. My brother Ethan looked up and said, "Let's be honest. If you had gotten that money, you would have spent it already." Something broke inside me at that moment. Because this wasn't just about money. This was the confession of how my family saw me. A failure. Weak. Someone who needed to be managed. To them, I wasn't a sister anymore. I was a file. I stood up. My hands were shaking. "You erased me," I said. "You removed me from this family." No one said no. That night, I left the house. I got into my car, rested my head on the steering wheel, and cried. But it wasn't the cry of defeat. It was the quiet beginning of an approaching storm. Because there was something they didn't know. In America, paperwork is powerful, yes. But when the truth comes out, even the cleanest-looking families fall apart. And my story didn't end at that table. That's where it actually began. What happened after that night didn't feel like one big explosion. It felt more like a slow collapse, the kind you only notice once you're already buried under it. It started the next morning while I was getting ready for work, with a notification on my phone. The automatic payment permissions on my salary account had been removed, and I hadn't done it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I called the bank, stood in the middle of my kitchen, took a deep breath so my voice wouldn't shake. But when the representative calmly told me that the authorized person on the account had been changed, and that Rachel now had control, my knees almost gave out. "I didn't approve this," I said. "That's impossible." The voice on the other end was gentle but firm. The documents were in the system. There was notarized approval. That's when I realized what happened with my family wasn't an argument. It was a planned move. When I got to work, I sat at my desk but couldn't look at the screen. The numbers were blurry. My boss, Mark, came by a few times. He noticed something was wrong but didn't ask for details, because everyone was expected to carry their own weight quietly. During lunch break, I called Rachel. Her tone was calm, almost bored. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is just temporary." "Temporary what?" I asked. "That's my money." "We're just organizing things," she said. And that word we hurt the most, because I wasn't included in it. That evening, I went back to the family house. When the door opened, their faces didn't show regret, only discomfort. My father tried to keep the conversation calm. My mother cried. But my sister laid the documents on the table and started explaining why everything made sense, like we were in a meeting. "You were a risk," she said. "We had to take control." "I'm not an object," I said. "And I'm not a file to be managed." My brother Ethan jumped in. "Let's be honest," he said. "If we hadn't done it this way, it would have been worse." There was a hidden accusation in that sentence, and I felt it clearly. They didn't trust me. When I left that house, for the first time I felt anger more than fear. Because I realized I had nothing left to lose. That night, I stayed up past midnight thinking about the documents, scrolling through legal websites on my phone. Seeing that what I was going through actually had a name both scared me and made me feel less alone. If you're wondering where this story is going, if what I'm describing feels familiar, or if you want to see how these quiet betrayals grow deeper, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments truly gives me strength. When I lay down that night, I didn't cry. Because I knew this was no longer about feelings. It was about a reckoning. And that reckoning wouldn't be as easy as they thought. The next day, when I decided to take time off and meet with a lawyer, I finally admitted to myself that I wasn't looking for a solution within the family anymore. From this point on, it wasn't about hurt feelings, it was about control. I walked into a small law office downtown, with half-covered windows. The lawyer's name was Daniel Brooks. He spoke calmly, chose his words carefully, and listened to my story from beginning to end without showing even the slightest surprise, which unsettled me, because it meant what I was describing wasn't rare. I spread the documents across his desk. He picked up the power of attorney file and studied it for a long time. Then he looked up and asked, "Do you remember signing this?" "No," I said. He placed his pen down and said, "Then we have a serious problem here." For the first time, someone was on my side. But instead of relief, it brought a heavier truth. Because the problem was my family. Daniel told me that in situations like this, there are usually only two possibilities. Either the person voluntarily gave up control, or they were misled through trust. There wasn't a third option. On the way home, I started thinking about the past. My mother telling me months earlier, "You need to sign these papers, it's an insurance thing." My father rushing me signing them out of exhaustion. That's when I realized nothing had happened all at once. It had been prepared step by step. That evening, Rachel called me. Her voice was sharp. "I know you went to a lawyer," she said. I didn't even ask how she knew, because I understood there were no secrets left. "Are you threatening us?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm defending myself." That made her angrier. "Are you really going to take your family to court?" she shouted. "Are you going to embarrass us?" That's when I understood their real fear wasn't losing me. It was how they would look to the outside world. After the call, my mother sent a long message. It was full of sentences swinging between guilt and love, but not once did it say, "I'm sorry." A sentence Daniel had said kept repeating in my mind, "The truth is, these people aren't trying to protect you. They're trying to manage you." I didn't sleep that night. I got up again and again, walked around the kitchen, because the hardest question in my head wasn't about money. Could I handle being in a legal battle with my own family? By morning, the answer came on its own, with another notification from the bank. My credit card had been cancelled. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a direct move. I called Daniel. "I'm going forward," I said. There was no hesitation in my voice. "Then be prepared," he said. "Because from this point on, they won't just attack you financially. They'll attack your character. When I hung up, I felt fear. But alongside it, for the first time, there was clarity. Every step they took to silence me was only making me more determined. And there was something they still didn't know. In this story, the one who would stay silent was no longer going to be me. It didn't take me long to understand that the moment my family realized they couldn't silence me through money, they changed direction. This time, their target wasn't my bank account, it was my mind. It all started with what seemed like an innocent phone call. My mother called. Her voice was soft, but her words were carefully chosen. "We're just worried," she said. "You seem very stressed lately." I had heard that sentence before, but this time it felt different. A few hours later, Daniel called me, and his voice was serious. "Someone in your family has submitted a file to the court regarding your mental state," he said, and something ice-cold spread through me. I immediately understood what they were trying to do. They wanted to portray me as unstable, impulsive, incapable of making decisions. When the documents reached me days later and I read the statements my sister had written, my stomach turned. Emotionally inconsistent, sudden anger outbursts, an unhealthy relationship with money. All of it was written about me. And at the bottom, my mother and father had signed. The same people who had spent my entire life telling me I was too sensitive, had now turned that into an official weapon. Daniel told me this was a commonly used tactic. If they can present you as mentally unreliable, he said, they can justify making financial decisions on your behalf. My throat tightened, because this was no longer just about the past. It was about my future. One evening, I went to the family house. When they opened the door and saw me, they didn't look surprised, as if they had been expecting me. We went into the living room. My mother sat with her hands clasped on her knees. My father started speaking. "This is for your own good," he said. "Sometimes people can't evaluate themselves properly." "Are you declaring me mentally ill?" I asked. My voice was calm, but I was burning inside. Rachel looked straight into my eyes and said, "We're just telling the truth." And in that moment, I understood that their truth depended on my silence. "I went to therapy," I said. "I went through a difficult divorce. Does that make me unfit?" My mother started crying. "We love you," she said. But we both knew that something done out of love couldn't cause this much systematic harm. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. For the first time, I asked myself this question: what if I actually become the person they're trying to convince everyone I am? That thought seeps in slowly, especially when the people saying it are the ones you've trusted since childhood. The next day, I met with Daniel again. He was very clear. "They're going to try to provoke you," he said. "They want to make you angry and collect evidence." At that moment, I remembered every argument from the past, every time I raised my voice, every day I cried, and I thought about how all of it could now be twisted. A week later, when a court-appointed evaluation request arrived, I wasn't even surprised anymore. They wanted a psychological assessment. When I held that paper in my hands, my knees felt weak, but I didn't cry. Because I knew exactly what I was facing. This was a character assassination. And the most painful part was that the people carrying it out shared my last name. That night, lying in bed, I felt something very clearly for the first time. If I didn't play this game by its rules, they could actually destroy me. And if I didn't want to be destroyed, I had to learn how to stay calm. As the day of the psychological evaluation approached, an invisible pressure settled over me, as if not only my behavior but even my thoughts were being watched. I woke up early on the morning of the appointment and spent an unreasonable amount of time deciding what to wear, because I knew even the smallest detail could be misinterpreted. If I dressed too formally, I could seem cold. If I dressed simply, I could seem careless. The evaluation center was an ordinary building, but the moment I walked inside, I felt like someone who had committed a crime. My name was on the list. My ID was taken. I was left alone in the waiting room. When the psychologist, Dr. Helen Wright, called me in, her expression was neutral. That should have been a good sign, but it didn't ease my tension. The questions started simply. My childhood. My job. My divorce. Then slowly, they shifted direction. How is your relationship with your family? Are you angry with them? Have there been moments when you couldn't control yourself? I could feel the hidden meaning beneath every question. They were waiting for me to look angry, to overreact. I tried to be honest, But I chose my words carefully, because honesty alone was no longer enough. Calmness had to be proven too. At one point, when Dr. Wright said, "Sometimes people exaggerate the injustices they experience," my heart started racing, but I kept my face neutral. "I'm describing what I experienced," I said. "I'm not adding interpretation." When the session ended and I walked outside, I felt like I had just finished a long exam without knowing whether I had answered correctly. Days later, Daniel called me and told me my family had made a countermove. Rachel had submitted additional materials to the evaluation process. Old messages, sentences pulled from arguments, audio recordings taken out of context. As I read them, I couldn't recognize myself. The person in those documents wasn't me, but they were speaking with my voice. The most devastating part was a note my mother had written. "My daughter sometimes confuses reality with imagination." I read that sentence over and over again, because for a mother to write that, something inside her has to be completely empty. From that moment on, I realized this wasn't just a legal process. It was a battle over who I was. Even at work, I started monitoring my own behavior. If I was too quiet during coffee breaks, I worried I would be seen as withdrawn. If I talked too much, I worried I would be seen as unstable. It was slowly consuming me. Daniel told me, "Their goal is to make you look like you're having a breakdown. You have to do the opposite." That day when I got home, I cried but silently, without giving anyone proof. Because even my emotions had become strategic. The evaluation report hadn't come back yet, but one thing was painfully clear to me. My family wasn't trying to drive me crazy. They were trying to make me look crazy. And that realization was the only thing keeping me standing. When my family reached out to my workplace, I understood that this was no longer just crossing a boundary. It was a direct attack. Because touching someone's livelihood is the most effective way to leave them completely defenseless. It started when my manager, Mark, called me into his office. After closing the door, he pointed to a file on his desk. His face was tense. "We received a call related to your family," he said, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. "What kind of call?" I asked. My voice was calmer than I expected, but there was a storm inside me. Mark explained that Human Resources had received a concern report. My family had stated that I was emotionally unstable, under financial stress, and that this could affect my work performance. My ears rang. Those sentences didn't just threaten me. They threatened my job. "That's not true," I said. "I'm going through a personal legal process." "I understand that," Mark said, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. In the business world, the word risk comes before everything else. When I left the meeting, I sat at my desk, but my fingers didn't move toward the keyboard. My eyes kept drifting to the door, like someone was watching me. That same evening, a message from Rachel appeared on my phone. "We wouldn't want you to lose your job," it said. That sentence was as clear as a threat. I called Daniel and told him everything. His voice hardened. "This is serious," he said. "They're trying to create witnesses." The next day, I had a formal meeting with HR. They asked polite but distant questions. Stress management. Support systems. Work-life balance. Everything sounded reasonable on the surface, but the implication underneath was clear. If I became a problem, I would be the first one to go. That week, everyone at the office started looking at me a little differently. No one said anything, but their looks were full of questions. And that silence was heavier than an open accusation. My family didn't stop there. I found out they had contacted my ex-husband. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but suddenly Daniel told me he had agreed to provide a written statement. He described me as a difficult person. Old arguments. The worst moments of my divorce were now placed in front of me again. At that point, my anger turned into clarity. I could finally see what they were doing. They were breaking me into pieces and spreading those pieces everywhere, planting small doubts in every environment, trying to make me unrecognizable. One evening, when I got home, I had a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was trembling. "Why are you making everything so difficult?" she said. That sentence shook me deeply, because even though I was the one being accused, the responsibility was still being placed on me. In a long meeting with Daniel, he said something very clearly. "This is no longer just about defense. It's time for a countermove." It was the first time I heard that word from him. It scared me, but it also brought relief, because staying passive had been draining me. That night, I opened my notebook and started writing everything down, with dates and times. Who called? What was said? Who witnessed what? Because I understood that memory alone wasn't enough. Everything had to become evidence. When I lay down in bed, the fear of losing my job was still there. But alongside it, there was a new feeling. Determination. My family thought they could isolate me. What they didn't know was this: the more they cornered me, the clearer I became. And in this story, I wasn't the one who had completely lost control. Everything was already complicated enough, but when one person in my family broke their silence, the balance shifted completely, and I never would have guessed who it would be. Late one evening, my phone rang. It was my brother Ethan. He never called me at that hour. When I answered, his voice was low and uneasy. "We need to talk," he said, "but not here." When we met, his face was pale. He kept looking around, weighing his words, and his first sentence caught me completely off guard. I didn't know it would go this far at the beginning. When I asked what he meant, there was a long silence. Then, piece by piece, he began to explain everything. When the plan was first discussed, it had been presented as nothing more than a temporary measure. Rachel had said she would control everything, that she was protecting me. But even when psychological reports and calls to my workplace entered the picture, he realized they no longer knew how to stop it. Ethan told me about the conversations that happened behind my back during family meetings. Hearing that my father had said, "If she looks strong she'll win," and that my mother had repeated the sentence, "Sarah can't make decisions on her own," over and over again, broke something inside me, because those words were echoes from my childhood. Worse still, Ethan admitted that Rachel had deliberately delayed certain documents and intentionally withheld some messages. His hands were shaking as he said it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He couldn't look me in the eye. "Because I can't sleep anymore," he said. "And something about this is wrong." When I got home, I called Daniel. He listened carefully, then said, "This is very important, but without something written or recorded, it's risky." The next day I met Ethan again and asked him to put what he'd said into writing. He hesitated. "We both knew what it meant to testify against your own family." "I'll lose them," he said. "They've already lost me," I replied, my throat tightening as I said it. A few days later, he came to Daniel's office and gave his statement. His voice trembled as he used formal language, but he didn't back down. It was the first real sound of a crack inside the family. After that, Rachel's attitude changed. Her messages became harsher. My mother fell completely silent, acting as if I didn't exist. That silence felt like a warning of the storm to come. Ethan also told me something else in secret. Rachel had kept a separate account with records of inheritance-related transactions, and he knew she had shown it to no one. That information echoed in my head, because this was no longer just about control, it was outright abuse. When Daniel and I added this detail to the file, I saw real hope on his face for the first time. But he warned me, from now on, they'll be much more aggressive. That night, when I got home, I didn't feel alone. The fear was still there, but alongside it was something else, the presence of someone who knew I was right. As I lay in bed, I thought this: while my family tried to silence me, they had failed to silence one of their own. And sometimes, a single crack is enough to bring down a wall. Once the court date was officially set, everyone understood there was no turning back, and that realization began to strip my family of their masks. On the morning of the first hearing, as I walked into the courthouse, I felt a strange calm. The fear was still there, but it was overridden by a sense of clarity. I had lost too much to get to this point, and I was no longer innocent enough to lose more. I saw Rachel in the hallway with her lawyer. Her face was hard, but her eyes avoided mine. My parents stood a few steps behind her. They didn't look at me, and that hurt more than confrontation would have. When the hearing began, everything was colder and more formal than I expected. Names were read, documents were listed, and my life was summarized in sentences that spanned years. When the other side spoke first, they described me as someone going through a difficult period, prone to emotional reactions. I clenched my hands to suppress the anger rising inside me, because I knew that was exactly what they wanted. Daniel stood up calmly and explained, step by step, how trust within the family had been systematically abused, how authority documents had been obtained, how the timing of financial transactions aligned, and how psychological pressure had been deliberately woven into the process. The judge's expression didn't change, but I could feel that he was listening carefully. The most unsettling moment came when Ethan was called as a witness. As he stood up, I saw my mother lower her head, while Rachel didn't move at all. Ethan's voice shook as he spoke, but his words were clear. He said decisions had been made in my absence, hidden behind the word protection, and that certain information had been intentionally withheld. The air in the courtroom grew heavy. The opposing attorney tried to corner him. "Are you standing against your family?" he asked. Ethan paused, then said, "I'm standing against what's wrong." That sentence put something inside me back into place. Then Rachel testified. She tried to maintain control, but as she went into detail, contradictions began to surface. One of her answers didn't align with earlier documents. The judge made a note, and even that small gesture gave me hope. No decision was issued that day, but the judge ordered the process expanded and a detailed review of the financial records. That was the first real breaking point. As we left the courthouse, my mother passed by me. Our eyes met, but she didn't say a word. That silence was no longer a defense, it was an escape. Rachel, meanwhile, was whispering sharply to her lawyer. The controlled expression on her face had cracked, and seeing that made me feel that what I'd gone through hadn't been for nothing. Daniel said to me, "This is just the beginning, but the ball is no longer in their court." I got home exhausted, but with a strange sense of strength inside me. For the first time, someone had listened to me. For the first time, my words were part of the official record. That night before falling asleep, I thought, my family believed they could manage me quietly, but the system they built to silence me had opened up in front of everyone, and the direction of this story was no longer under their control. After the first hearing, everything accelerated, because Rachel panicked for the first time, and panic is the most dangerous moment for people who are used to being in control. Days passed without a sound. No one from the family called or messaged me. They acted as if I didn't exist. But that silence didn't calm me. On the contrary, it felt like the sign of an approaching mistake. While Daniel and I were reviewing documents, an unexpected email dropped into my phone. The sender was Rachel, but my name wasn't in the recipient line. She had clearly sent it to the wrong person in a rush. When I opened it, my heart started racing. There was an attachment I had never seen before, and its name was simple but jarring: transfer_summary_final. Instinctively, I called Daniel. He told me to forward the email to him before opening it. A few minutes later, his tone changed. "This is very serious," he said. The file showed the dates of inheritance transfers, account numbers, and most importantly, large movements that coincided with the very weeks of my psychological evaluation. While they claimed they were taking control to protect me, they had simultaneously moved the money into a different investment account. Even more disturbing were Rachel's own notes at the bottom of the file, clearly written with the assumption no one else would ever see them. "Sarah needs to look weak during this process. We shouldn't rush." Reading that sentence made me nauseous, because this was no longer interpretation or misunderstanding, it was a conscious strategy. Daniel acted immediately. The email's metadata, sending time, IP information, all of it was secured and added to the case file. At that point, the direction of the case shifted completely. An emergency submission was made to the court the same day, new evidence was entered, and the other side's good faith defense took a heavy blow. Shortly after, Rachel's lawyer called Daniel and claimed it had been an accidentally sent draft, but it was already too late. The documents weren't drafts, they were processed records. That evening, I received a message from my mother for the first time. It was a single sentence: "We never wanted it to come to this." In that moment, I realized she was still placing the responsibility on me. Daniel told me the document proved not only financial misconduct, but also psychological manipulation. "It clearly shows they tried to deliberately weaken you," he said. For the first time, I truly felt the case was winnable. The next day, Rachel called me. Her voice was uncontrolled. "Delete that email," she said. "Tell the court you didn't submit it." And in that moment, everything that had built up inside me over the years condensed into one clear certainty. "No," I said. "Not anymore." She hung up on me, but this time I wasn't afraid, because for the first time, the balance had truly shifted. At work, Mark called me into his office again. This time, there was curiosity on his face instead of suspicion. "Some of what we heard may not be accurate," he said. That sentence was a small but meaningful victory for me. Reputation doesn't return overnight, but once a crack forms, people begin to reconsider. As Daniel and I prepared for the next phase in court, he told me, this document could shorten the process, but he warned me, it could also harden them even more. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a complex emotion. It wasn't relief. It certainly wasn't joy. It was a bitter confirmation. I could no longer deny that my family hadn't hurt me by accident, they had used me deliberately. But seeing that truth didn't weaken me. On the contrary, it allowed me to see my own side with complete clarity for the first time. And I understood this. In this story, what hurt me most wasn't money or reputation, but the cold calculations carried out under the guise of love. And now, that account was open for everyone to see. When I walked into the courthouse on the day of the second hearing, the atmosphere felt different this time. The corridors were the same, but people were looking at me differently now. There were whispers, lingering glances, and the silence on Rachel's side had turned into a tense kind of acceptance. Daniel walked beside me without saying a word, but the way he held the file told me something had shifted today. When we entered the courtroom, the judge first announced that the newly submitted evidence had been officially added to the case file. Rachel's face tightened in that moment. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something to her, but she no longer looked in control. For the first time, her eyes avoided the room. When Daniel spoke, his voice was calm but his sentences were precise. He talked about the mistakenly sent email, the timing, and how the psychological evaluation process and the financial moves had been carried out in parallel. He didn't accuse anyone directly, he simply placed the facts side by side, and that made the story even stronger. As the judge reviewed the documents, a deep silence filled the courtroom. Even the sound of pages turning felt loud, and in that moment, I sensed the pressure that had been weighing on me for years slowly shifting onto other shoulders. When the other side moved into their defense, their tone had changed. The word protection was used less often now, replaced by phrases like misunderstanding, but even this retreat couldn't hide the truth. The most jarring moment came when the judge addressed Rachel directly. "Did you write this note?" he asked. After a brief pause, Rachel said, "Yes, but it's taken out of context." That sentence mirrored the same defense that had been used against me so many times before. When the judge looked up and asked, "What exactly is the context?" Rachel had no answer. My parents were sitting in the back rows. My mother's hands were shaking, and my father wore an expression that made him look truly old for the first time. Seeing them like that caused a complicated pain inside me, because I had never wanted things to reach this point. Ethan was called as a witness again. This time he was calmer, because he knew he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't take back anything he had said, in fact, he clarified it further. When he stated that in some meetings Rachel had said, "If we make Sarah look emotional, our job gets easier," the judge stopped taking notes and looked directly at him. That look shifted the balance of the room. When the court took a short recess, Daniel turned to me and for the first time, a faint smile appeared on his face. "They're not just defending anymore," he said. "They're answering for it now." After the break, the judge didn't announce a final decision, but his remarks were more powerful than any ruling. He spoke about how abusing trust within a family could have serious consequences, how turning psychological labeling into a legal tool was unacceptable, and how this file contained strong indications of exactly that. My throat tightened as he spoke, because for the first time, someone was saying it out loud. Rachel's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "This case is no longer about intentions," he said. "It's about actions." In that moment, I saw Rachel's shoulders drop. The hearing was postponed, but this postponement wasn't uncertainty, it was direction. On the way out, Rachel took a step toward me. Her eyes were filled, but she wasn't crying. "Did it have to end like this?" she asked. For the first time, I really looked at her. "I didn't start this," I said, "but I need to finish it." My mother approached me, wanting to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She stepped back without saying anything, and in that moment I realized that sometimes people understand what they've lost not in a courtroom, but in silence. When I walked out of the courthouse, the air was cold, but inside me there was a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the joy of victory, it was the tired calm of feeling justice touch my life for the first time. I cried in the car on the way home, but this time not out of helplessness, out of the relief of a burden I had carried for years finally feeling a little lighter. And in that moment I knew this. As this story was approaching its end, I was no longer a character defined by others, but a person reclaiming her own name. When the day of the decision arrived, I woke up early, though it felt like I hadn't slept at all. As I made coffee in the kitchen, I noticed my hands were shaking. When I looked in the mirror, I saw no trace of the scattered self-doubting woman from months before. But the person who had replaced her wasn't entirely strong either, she simply no longer denied the truth. When I entered the courthouse, I felt a strange calm, because even if I couldn't control the outcome, no one could tell my story in my place anymore. Before closing the file, the judge gave a long assessment. He said that family ties did not stand above the law, that claims of good intentions were not enough to cover bad faith actions. Then the decision was announced, all financial restrictions placed on me were lifted, the authority documents were declared invalid, my access to my assets was restored, and the file was referred to the prosecutor's office. No sound rose in the courtroom at that moment, but something inside me unraveled. This wasn't a moment of revenge, it felt more like releasing a breath I had been holding for a very long time. I looked at Rachel. Her eyes were fixed on nothing. My mother was crying. My father didn't even stand up. And for the first time, I felt this clearly, it was not my responsibility to save them. Outside, Rachel wanted to talk. Her voice was tired. "We lost everything," she said. I looked at her calmly and replied, "No. I got myself back." What she called loss was control, what I had gained was freedom. When I got home, I locked the door and sat on the couch for the first time, and the house finally felt like it belonged to me. My phone rang, messages came in, but I silenced them all, because that day I had no strength left to give anything to anyone. In the weeks that followed, life slowly found its rhythm again. My accounts were sorted out, I focused on my job, I continued therapy, and most importantly, I learned to trust my own decisions again. My relationship with my family didn't completely end, but now I was the one setting the boundaries, and those boundaries were not silent, but clear and firm. The reason I'm telling this story isn't to blame anyone, but to let someone in a similar situation know they're not alone. Because sometimes betrayal comes from the place you least expect, and what hurts the most isn't money or inheritance, but the identity taken from you under the words "for your own good." If you've listened this far, if this story touched something inside you, subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and sharing your thoughts in the comments helps these kinds of stories continue, and shows others that they're not alone. I started by breaking my silence. Maybe you'll take a step in your own life too. This is not my ending. This is where I begin again.